You know, I keep hearing people seem to think that curved greatsword is like the next big thing.
Yeah, no, of course.
Like, they're the new meta, man. No, of course. But you know, I just don't know if I really buy it.
Well, you know, they say it's impossible to space it.
I mean, sure, it's alright.
Like, you think you're safe, but you're never really safe.
I mean, I don't know if I'd say that.
I mean, why don't we just test it?
Wait, hold on. Let me just... Ah! Dude, just stop. Oh my god. Okay, I get you. Yeah, no, stop.
Say you're sorry.
I'm sorry. Hi, my name's Rust. I'm an Elden Ring content creator with an emphasis on PvP. Today, I'm going to take you through a detailed guide on curved greatswords. This is going to be a deep dive into the weapon class, covering everything from weapon selection to optimal use of the weapon. I did a lot of work in this video with much help from my friend Tarnishedchimp, who's able to provide expert reference on use of the weapon, and I couldn't have done this video without him. Go follow him on Twitch. If you enjoy the video, feel free to like and subscribe, and be sure to leave a comment if you found the information helpful at all or what I can do to improve in the future. There's going to be a lot of information that's covered in this video, so there will be timestamps in the description if you want to refer to a specific part of the video. Here we'll be covering everything from moveset and frame data, weapon selection, offhand weapons, build optimization, animation blending, true combos, pseudo combos, and a showcase where I display the concepts covered in this video. Curved greatswords are by far the best weapon class that I've covered in a video so far, as every move in its kit is viable in some way or another. The weapon can either be used one-handed or two-handed for fairly similar movesets, with some niche differences. The regular R1s come out at 17 frames, and the crouch attack comes out at 14 frames. The R2 comes out at 21 frames, or 19 frames on the Omen Cleaver's unique R2, but the R2 is very deceptive, having an insane amount of root motion, moving the character's body very far forward, with a wide sweeping attack that's pretty much impossible to strafe. Two-handed, the weapon gets hyper armor, which, much like any other great weapon, allows you to train it infinitely with things like power stance straight swords when you have over 90 poise with Morgotts talisman. But the one-handed moveset allows you for the use of an offhand weapon, which can help cover the inherent weaknesses of the weapon. The only real reason that you should ever be two-handing the weapon is if you're running a strength build, so that you can get the two-handed strength bonus, or if you just really need that hyper armor to trade through your opponent's attack. Given the root motion on the R2, you can roll catch extremely consistently from R1 to R2. The hitbox on the crouch attacks and the R2 are a little weird though, and tend to angle themselves down into the ground. Because of this, you pretty much always want to unlock when going for a roll catch with either of these attacks, because you'll get significantly more effective range out of the weapon if you angle your camera up about 30 degrees toward the sky. The major flaw of the curved greatsword is that it has little in the way of anti-air on its moveset. The R2 and the crouch attack can be punished with a neutral jump very consistently. You can try and avoid this by tilting your camera as high as you can possibly go if you expect them to jump, but it's generally just something that you need to be cautious of. Since all of your attacks have horizontal movement, you can dead angle your attack to either connect at the earliest or latest part of the hitbox to mess with your opponent's ability to react roll your attacks. There's a lot of good options when it comes to the different curved greatswords, but the ones that stand out above the others are the Bloodhound's Fang, Morgotts, Dismounter, and Omen Cleaver. Picking which one that you want to use really comes down to the build you're running and personal preference. Bloodhound's Fang has ridiculous damage on a dexterity build with the unique bonus of having innate bleed and still being buffable. So what tends to work best for this weapon is running a pure dex build with either Faith to use Bloodflame Blade or just using drawstring grease. The Ash of War is largely considered a meme, but it actually is a decent roll catch. If you land a regular R1 on your opponent, then it pseudo combos perfectly into the first part of the Ash of War if the opponent panic rolls. Morgotts scales best on the dexterity build and has some innate bleed buildup, but it's a rather pitiful amount, even on a fully optimized arcane build, and you can end up getting better bleed buildup from just using Bloodhound's Fang with bleed grease. It's the longest of the options though, and can roll catch very reliably as long as you're unlocking to fray aim your crouching and R2 attacks, like I mentioned before. The Ash of War is genuinely stupid though, and it can be escaped if your opponent has really high latency to you, but the Ash of War gets a ton of hyper armor, an insane amount of root motion, and incredible tracking, make it extremely difficult to avoid. The Dismounter is probably the best option of all of these, being infusible and buffable with incredible range, second only to Morgotts. This weapon works best by being infused with any buffable Ash of War like Flaming Strike, Chilling Mist, or Poison Mist. Chimp always recommends Sword Dance, and I genuinely was really surprised in how effective it is. It gets a lot of hyper armor during the attack, and was able to poise through two of my R1s with a curved greatsword of my own. The Omen Cleaver has a unique R2 chop animation when two-handed, which is incredibly fast, high damaging, and can roll catch into itself if the appendix rolls to the side or inwards. I like using it with an off dagger so that I can poise chip with the off dagger, then two-hand the weapon to set up for a storm stomp into R2. It's always a true combo unless your opponent rolls away from you, in which case the range of the R2 is too short to combo. Omen Cleaver is the only other option that I'd really give credit to, as everything else is simply outclassed by the options that we already covered. You might argue for like Beastman's Cleaver because of its high damage stat, but it's fucking short as hell, and the incredible range of these weapons is one of the main highlights of it, so it really just isn't worth it. Generally speaking, the best options for offhands are a dagger or thrusting sword. Both of these options provide a strong whiff punishing tool that pseudo-combos into itself and does a fair bit of poise damage, which can either help set up with for Ashes of War like Flaming Strike and Storm Stomp. The main difference between the two options is that Dagger is a lower commitment, allowing you to easily roll out of the attack without risk of being punished, but the Thrusting Sword provides a much more effective whiff punishing tool and can pseudo-combo into itself if the opponent rolls in or to the side. A Dagger allows you to pseudo-combo from Dagger into R1, and will generally connect even if your opponent rolls directly away from you. At the end of the day, both are good options and it just comes down to personal preference. In terms of build optimization, you have quite a few ways that you can go, but in terms of infusible weapons, I would argue that the Dismounter is always the best choice. It may not have the highest AR, but the added range gives it a much more reliable roll catch than any of the other infusible weapons. I generally wouldn't recommend a strength build because the utility that you get from an offhand weapon is just too valuable to pass up, but the Dismounter and Omen Cleaver have comparable damage to each other, both are buffable, and have access to a number of Ashes of War that make these a good choice. On a dexterity build, you'll get the most benefit from using something like an offhand Wakizashi alongside the Bloodhound's Fang, with the highest amount of AR in addition to being able to buff the weapon with bleed grease for an effective bleed buildup. If you don't care about bleed, and you just want to go for the higher AR, then a lightning infused Dismounter is the way to go. Of course, you can always opt for Morgotts on a dexterity build, as it gets better scaling on dexterity than it does with arcane. But this is more of a personal preference, and is generally outclassed by the other options. You can also run Intelligence or Faith, which do pretty good damage on magic and sacred infusions respectively, and Dismounter's damage can even surpass the Magma Worm Scaled Sword if you use Sacred Blade with it. Arcane is simply the worst build option at this level bracket since none of the infusible weapons have innate status, and you get better bleed buildup from simply running the Bloodhound's Fang with bleed grease. Morgott starts to see some decent damage at like level 200 when you can start to hit the soft caps of both dexterity and arcane, but it's still severely outclassed by Bloodhound's Fang on a strength dexterity build at that level. Curved greatswords are a very good weapon in their own right, but they become infinitely better when you start learning how to blend your animations. The R1 chain of the Curved Greatsword is slow and technically very reactable, but given the bizarre animations of the attacks, it can be deceptively difficult to roll the attack on reaction. The startup of the first R1 looks nearly identical to the startup of the R2, and you can interchange these attacks to throw off your opponent. When two-handing, you can cancel the recovery of your R1 by holding sprint forward and tapping the block button. As soon as your character takes a step forward, you can then cue another R1, and the startup of the animation is hidden by the character's attempt to put it back on your shoulder. But what makes Curved Greatsword as good as it is the ability to hide the crouch attacks. The crouch attack just comes out one frame slower than Serpent Hunter, and disguises just as well. You can blend the animations by wave dashing and doing a funny little tech that I've come to understand as being called a dreamer spin, which can make your character do these little spin animations by being locked onto your opponent while holding sprint and then tilting the movement stick either to side or straight back to force a pivot. In order to do this more effectively, you need to either block cancel or crouch cancel to do this, otherwise you'll get pivot locked and risk getting punished if you get caught off guard in the middle of a fight. The timing is tricky and it takes practice, but the idea is that you basically tap block or crouch at the same time while you're pivoting in order to avoid getting pivot locked. As you shift back and forth through the crouch state, you'll store the crouch state, allowing you to let off an extremely well blended crouch attack whenever you want. Once you have the blending down, then you start to mix up your timings to good effect, either letting off an extremely fast attack that's difficult to react to, or delaying for a roll catch. Now, the safest answer to dealing with a Curved Greatsword that's trying to vortex the crouch attacks is just jump over it. So as an answer, the safest thing for you to do is to pull away from them after you've put them in hit stun just far enough to wait that if they mash out of hit stun, then you don't get hit, but not so far away that you can't punish it. As with anything, it just takes patience and practice. While Curved Greatswords don't have an extraordinary number of true combos at its disposal, it has amazing pseudo-combo potential, which is only enhanced when having an offhand weapon available. I'm going to quickly go over a number of true combos and pseudo combos available to the Curved Greatswords. this point in the video, I'll be commentating over a number of showcases for each of the different weapons that I covered in this video, where I'll highlight the concepts that I talked about in the previous sections. Enjoy the fights. For the first fight, we're starting off with Bloodhound's Fang, which works really well with Blood Grease to get a bleed proc within 3 to 5 hits. Now, when you first start off a fight, it's generally a good call to see how your opponent will respond instead of immediately going for roll catches, and we see why, as my opponent mashes out hit stun, and then again, and then the bleed proc finishes the fight. Actually insane. Up next, my opponent has pretty high latency to me at about 160 ms, so roll catching and whiff punishing is going to be really difficult. So I'll be better off playing rather aggressively, trying to make use of the blended animations and the phantom range to catch my opponent off guard. Using bleed grease can work really well to disguise the animations of your running attacks, blending very smoothly from the grease to the running R2. My opponent has the right idea though of trying to jump my attack, but due to our high latency and the fast recovery of the dagger, I can get a free hit without getting punished. He gets me back for it with the insane anti-air of his own, but it's definitely deserved. My opponent is getting pretty low at this point, so I can comfortably trade with him to get a win. I see him lining up the running attack and I'm able to jump it for a punish, and now he's down to his last little bit of health. But coming toward the end, we get a little meme and we go for the Ash of War. Neither of us is able to punish it on this high lat, but I'm able to finish the fight with a swipe from the off dagger with the phantom range of a Great Lance. The next fight, we score up against Sword and Board. The running attacks from Curved Greatsword are parry food, having a really long and obvious wind-up. So I'm going to be avoiding going for them here. More so, I want to be trying to space punish my opponent or punish the parry attempts on prediction. We have really good lat, so I comfortably space his neutral jump and get some chip with the dagger, and then fail the backstab grab on his forward roll. He finally swaps off the parry shield, thank god. So he's probably going to be getting more aggressive, and I free him the crouch R1 away from him to bait him in, and then punish his whiffed attempt with an R1. Which blends really well when you 180 like this. My opponent is down to his last little bit of health, so I start working in the dagger to no success, but he charges into the Ash of War, which I cancel out of and then finish the fight with a crouch attack. This next fight is a great example of a little thing called microspacing, which by many in the community is considered a myth. I get an early read that my opponent is going to be whiffing his jump attack, so I punish it immediately with an R1. He gets out, and we see the phantom hit very late, confirming the latency. But I roll through, and start up the R2 while I'm turned away from my opponent to space his backswing, and I land the whiff punish. I dead angled the dagger away for a little bit of extra root motion, and turn it back to space punish his aggression. It's these little things that make or break a fight. It's not always just about the fancy shuffling around in neutral, it's just about how you make use of the little adjustments that can win you the fight. Now, if only I could play this well consistently, then I might actually be able to call myself decent at the video game, but consistency is what makes the difference between a great player and, well, me, I guess. Next up, my opponent has over 200 ping to me, and my opponent makes the better choice of going for Rot here instead of Bleed. He's using the Scorpion Stinger in his offhand, which is a great choice and allows him to easily proc status on me. Since I can't seem to be able to whiff punish him no matter how tight I make the timing, I change my prerogative to maintaining pressure in neutral. He goes for an off-dagger hit as I catch him with the backswing, and then from here I dead angle my attacks to try and catch the different parts of the hitbox to mess up his roll timings. The off-dagger is your best friend in these high latency fights because it's very difficult to react to, has a lot of added phantom range, and there's a little risk of getting punished. But I avoid his R1 here and then punish with the off-dagger by framing my weapon art to the opposite direction to get an early hit on the hitbox. Since our lat is so high, I'm not as worried about getting backstabbed, so I go for the follow-up just to see if it sticks. It doesn't, surprise. But my opponent's on their last bit of health, and I think I caught them in their menu here because I land the running attack, which finishes the fight, and I'm sure that they'd actually be able to react roll that pretty easily otherwise. So I was hanging out one day, and this beauty of a fight happened. Truly one of the greatest displays of skill expression that anyone has ever witnessed. For real, on God, no cap on a stack, actual, factual. I don't know, what else do the kids say these days? Anyway, shit was funny. My favorite part was when he said, "It's bloodhounding time," and then he bloodhounded all over the place. Now we bring out the Omen Cleaver. I actually really like this weapon despite all my praise about the Dismounter. The R2s are funny, and they hit way more often than they should. My opponent is running a very meta setup with power stance straight swords and over 100 poise, so before I can go for the Storm Stomp, I need a poise chip with a dagger in order to bring him in range of it. It's another pretty high latency match at about 140 ping, but it's still manageable. The main thing is that I need to be really careful with the poise health and not go for trades when my poise is chipped, otherwise I'll get blendered by the straight swords. When we finally get the off dagger chip in, I go to two-hand the weapon and then line up the Storm Stomp. My opponent starts rolling in toward me, so I take that as my opportunity, which connects, and then I'm able to get a nice 700 damage hit for his mistake. He keeps going for these like running L1s, and they're a pretty bad move on the straight swords, so I am going to punish him for it. Now, again, the major flaw of the two-handed chop is its short range, and it only works if the opponent rolls in. But here we use the deceptive backswing to catch my opponent off guard as they try and pressure me into rolling, get some chip with the off dagger, and then roll catch with the following R1. Here we see the issue of the R2, where after the Storm Stomp, it just doesn't have enough range to be able to catch my opponent who panic rolled the Ash of War. My opponent is pretty low at this point and will start to play really reactively, so I find my way in when close to them, get the off dagger hit, and then pseudo combo with the R1 to finish it off. With the Dismounter, I'll be using an offhand thrusting sword, just to try and showcase a different offhand setup. It's used quite differently from the dagger, as the dagger is more geared toward forcing rolls to ensure roll catches, or getting unpunishable chip damage from neutral. The thrusting sword is a better tool for forcing action out of neutral and not risking getting too close. You can poke with the thrusting sword to goad your opponent into an attack, and then use it to punish them for being overly aggressive. You have to play carefully into weapons that get hyper armor when using one-handed curved greatsword, because a two-handed greatsword or a one-handed colossal can hyper armor through your attacks given that they have enough passive poise. Our lat in this fight isn't the worst and definitely isn't the best, but we take some trades. Honestly, this fight is more representative of the strength of the offhand thrusting sword than it is about the Dismounter, but I think it's a good way to be able to showcase it anyway. My opponent fails to space out my continued attacks. He rolls in and misses his rolling attack, thank God, because of the awful tracking on regular greatswords, once again proving why it never hurts to have a little curve in your sword. They go for the reverse backstep out of neutral, which gives me 2 free hits with the thrusting sword to end the fight. There's a little tech in this game that always gets me. The tech is known as, "Who does that?" And this guy starts off the fight by displaying a fantastic job of the "Who does that" tech by going for a guard counter, which completely takes me by surprise. But now I kind of know what to expect from this guy and will be mindful of randomness. I get 2 pokes in with the thrusting sword and bail because I feel like me trying to YOLO parry, which if you want to learn how to get more parries consistently, then just wait till the next video because I'm doing a collab with the Coop who's going to teach me all of the secrets behind his extremely consistent parries. But TLDR, don't try and reaction parry a thrusting sword. My guy goes and whips out his colossal sword out of his pants, and now I'm feeling emasculating. Like, damn. Boy, he fit that whole thing in his trousers. Literally insane. But despite having a bigger sword, I have this funny thing called an offhand weapon, which does pretty much all the work for the rest of the fight, as his weapon is too slow to punish it. I'd like to say it's not all about the size, but that's just copium. We all know that size matters. Finally, we get around to Morgotts, which is probably my favorite of the choices, just because of the added range. Roll catching is so much more reliable with this weapon, just because the range is absurd. And if I feel like I just want to trade, then I can just use the Ash of War to get all the hyper armor in the world. We get a bleed proc off of the dagger, clip him with the extended range of the weapon, and finish the fight by jumping over his running R2. Now, this is the first fight on low latency that I've had all day of doing this recording, and I wanted to take full advantage of it. Phantom range just doesn't exist for this fight, on either side. So I wanted to show off a little and do the funny microspacing thing. But my opponent is playing extremely aggressively, giving very few fucks about my priority, so I'm taking advantage of that every time that I can. But he seems to have been bothered by my little shenanigans, and now it's his turn to try and be that guy, but unfortunately, he's just not that guy. On our last fight, I really wanted to focus on the idea of not always going for the roll catch, but instead playing in such a way that anticipates that the opponent is going to try and mash for the hits. Anyway, by giving them a little bit of room after their attempted mash, you can avoid the risk of getting hit and punish their attempted mash. You don't always have to be a goblin stepping around in their face to win a match. Curved greatswords have incredible range, and you want to use that to your fullest advantage. Once again, I'd like to thank the Tarnishedchimp, who provided a lot of insight on an optimal use of the weapon. Please go follow him over on Twitch.